Welcome to the Test Guild Performance and Site Reliability Podcast, where we all get together to learn more about performance testing with your host, Joe Colantonio.
Hey, it's Joe, and welcome to another episode of the Test Guild Performance and Site Reliability Podcast. Today we'll be talking with Evan all about making the move from SDET to SRE. And we'll probably also touch on other topics like working from home. Evan is an engineer with a wide variety and range of test automation, development, security, software quality, DevOps, site reliability experience. So he's done a lot of things. He also organizes the Austin Automation Pros meetup for everyone who's interested in learning. Really great meetup. I had them on Test Talks. I'll have a link to that in the show notes. They've done a lot of great things there. So if you're in that area, once everything calms down with the coronavirus, you definitely want to go and check it out. But you don't want to miss this episode. Check it out. Let's face it, performance testing is tough. Traditional load testing tools create scripts that are bogged down in data, that's hard to read, and require a lot of work, even for simple playback. Load Ninja cuts out the dirty work by using AI to inspect and debug your code almost instantly. No coding necessary, no changing of hands or relays between teams either. Give it a shot. It's free and easy to try. Head on over to testguild.com/smartbear and click on the link to learn more. Hey, Evan, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Joe. Yeah, it's great to talk to you again.
Very cool. So it seems like there's a lot that's been going on with you since last time we spoke in the Test Talks podcast. So before we get into it, can you tell us anything that I may have missed in your intro?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, basically just ended up switching over from, mostly focused on test automation and just quality in general. And then just more into the SRE space. But yeah, not a whole lot. Yeah, it's pretty much covers it.
So I actually think that's a pretty big switch going from SDET to SRE. Maybe I'm wrong. That's what this show is all about. But why did you make the switch?
I made the switch. I was just interested in learning more about operations. I know this is something that's been around for quite some time, since the beginning, essentially. But I just, I heard, I think it might have been a meetup, but it was basically just like ideas of testing infrastructure as code. And that was just something that kind of sparked an interest in learning more about the space. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it.
Nice. Now, for folks I don't know, I guess we should start with this. What is a site reliability engineer anyway?
Sure. So site reliability engineering is pretty much at a high level. It's just a mix of responsibilities at this point. Operations being solved as code, just reducing toil, just adding automation to the mix. Identifying reliability in systems and ensuring it. I think that covers it at a super, super high level. And then, of course, as I mentioned in the article, you want to check out Liz Fung Jones and Seth Fargo's discussion on this role on YouTube, as it goes, a lot more in depth and kind of differentiates, what it actually is versus, something like DevOps.
Yeah, cool. So we used to have my other company, a DevOps team. But it sounds like this is, so this team would be separate from your DevOps team?
It would. And in my particular organization right now, it's just kind of a mix of roles, particularly because, we're just a smaller team. But in larger organizations, you might see SRE as just something as simple as an infrastructure engineer or site reliability engineer. There's other titles for it as well, but ultimately, they're going to be hugely responsible for, just the uptime, the reliability of these applications, of these services.
Nice. So when you made the move, I'm just curious to know skills you needed that are the same and skills that are different. I think that'll help people know how big of a transition it was. So, moving from an SDET to an SRE, what skills were the same that you used as an SDET that would be the same that you would use in an SRE type role?
Yeah, absolutely. Really what it comes down to is, the main takeaway here is definitely understanding code at this point, because a lot of what I'm doing is just driven by that. At a high level, just a curious individual, of course, just the ability to question everything. So, perhaps you're breaking things on purpose is one of the things that I'd mentioned. And, taking on the roles of users. So potentially, thinking about security, thinking about, as you're setting up infrastructure, you're setting up a firewall, whatever you might be doing, and just thinking about how you can potentially, break that or how you can get in there. With infrastructure, it's interesting because, you can set up an infrastructure, you can set up, in my personal experience, with Kubernetes engine, I'm using GKE. So that's Google Kubernetes engine. And we're setting up services. So we're setting up a bunch of microservices right now. And all of these are pods and they're running fine at the moment. But realistically, you want to get in there and you want to, basically just remove one, for example, what breaks, which microservices were reliant on each other. So it relates to fault injection as well, it seems. But that's some of the high level stuff. Context, of course, understanding, some deeper purposes of some of the tooling that you're using. Because in the ops and the SRE space, there's just so many, in the test world as well, there's just like this overwhelming amount of tools, like whether it was open source or whether it was like vendor specific. There's just a lot to keep up with.
How do you keep up with it then?
Lately, a couple of different ways. So a podcast is definitely like one way that I keep up with it. I'm in a different position where like I do have a commute, not incredibly long, but to the point where like I can enjoy some podcasts. I can enjoy some audiobooks. There's quite a few podcasts out there. There's like the Kubernetes podcast from Google, because that's mostly what I've been working on. And mind you, Kubernetes isn't something that's specific to SRE, but it's just something that I'm specifically working on. You could have like more of a traditional infrastructure, that and still be an SRE, but just with the introduction of all this new tooling, you can pretty much expect to be, working on microservices, Kubernetes platform. But yeah, just getting back to it, just the podcasts. Podlets is another good podcast. Obviously, Test Guild, whether it's performance, security. On-Call Nightmares is pretty interesting because it talks more about, the space of, essentially being woken up in the middle of the night if there's an issue with the system. The whole aspect of, having a pager, the pager duty. Test and Code, I'm kind of a big fan of. Ollcast, so that's for observability. That's a really interesting one. I've had, I've listened to a lot of great ones from there, and that's over from honeycomb.io, and HashiCast, of course. And then those are some of the podcasts. There's obviously books, but it really depends. Like sometimes I'm digging through books, like because over the past 2 years or so, I've always been into books. So for me, like that just works for me. Something can work entirely different for someone else, but just throughout the day, I find myself digging through documentation. But that's just staying on top of things. Twitter as well. Like I get so much information from Twitter, and it's definitely overwhelming. So just target who you follow. Whether it's SRE, ops, whatever they're tweeting about. Whether it's a new language or new tool set, whatever it might be. It helps out a lot. And because we're multi-cloud at the moment, so with AWS and Google Cloud, I found myself just reading what they're releasing, because oftentimes like what they're releasing, relates to something that I might be working on. So that, really that helps me stay on top of things as well. But then at the same time, like you just don't want to overwhelm yourself, because it's super easy to get overwhelmed in the space. Yeah.
So I'm just curious to know if someone is trying to think, oh, I'm an SDET now, maybe this sounds interesting. I like to be a little more involved with site reliability engineering. What skills do you think they need to hone in on that they may not have currently to help make that transition over?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, because my traditional background was just in purely exploratory testing. I was signed on just to click around and just to identify, issues with the site. And then over time, I just ended up picking up automation, and with automation, focus on languages. So, really like a big step in the move, in my opinion, would be just to lock down a language. I know when I was working on, more test automation problems, checking, whatever you want to call it, I really enjoyed Dave Hefner's book. And that was this Selenium testing book. And basically like, what I really enjoyed about the book is you had, several different options for several different languages, language bindings. And I had chosen originally Ruby, because I was building out like a proof of concept for us, and I just got really, really involved with it. And I actually ended up going through a code boot camp, so I thought that was interesting, and that helped out quite a bit. But once again, like I said, you can do a lot of self-learning. There's a lot of free resources out there, like Free Code Camp. But that book made a big impact in terms of like just learning a language and then just kind of applying that. Eventually went into Python, And then Python kind of, works hand in hand with a lot of things, but, in a lot of ways with infrastructure as well, like Boto 3 with AWS. So I would definitely say like hard skills, like, pick up a language, get comfortable with, potentially Python, potentially working with Bash, something like Bash, definitely the command line. I like, as just into like traditional testing and traditional like exploratory testing, I wasn't like working a big deal with, command line tools and stuff like that prior to actually, getting into more of a test automation role. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. If you're coming from like purely like just a testing background, definitely take some time and, each day, and just focus on a core language, because you're gonna be working with a lot of different things. You're gonna be working with a lot of different languages, and that's something to keep in mind as well. And then definitely familiarize yourself with infrastructure. Because that was a concept I wasn't familiar with either. I knew to go to a specific endpoint and then just begin running through the site and testing the site. Whether it was from exploratory testing and time boxing that, or whether it was through like a list of items to actually test, and then eventually to automate, right? So that's something to keep in mind as well. Just like how infrastructure works, particularly public clouds, and of course it depends on what organization you're in right now, or you want to go to. But I would say the majority of what I've seen from like small to medium sized businesses, they're definitely dealing with public clouds. I mean, like the current organization I'm at, our exception is like, we're a multi-cloud to some degree. So we're using AWS and Google Cloud. So that's definitely something to keep in mind there as well. Just understand infrastructure, understand a language, and get really comfortable with that language. Try to get really comfortable with that language. And, look at, maybe go to linuxacademy.com, and then say, for example, if you chose Python, and then go through their, automating AWS with Python 3. That helps out a lot. Even if you go through that course, it's going to take you step by step through, understanding the language itself, but also like using it with like a library, like, Boto 3. And then you can understand each piece. And mind you, like another takeaway is just like, you don't have to understand like all of the infrastructure, but just like some specific, like maybe even like an administration perspective of like, setting up IAM roles and maybe deploying like, a couple EC2 instances or whatever it might be. But yeah, that's what I would look into. And even like, to push that further, maybe even looking at Kubernetes. But once again, it just depends on like the size of the organization you're in, and then what tools you're working with.
I mean, a question I would have is, how big of a role do you think this is? Meaning, how popular do you think this role has become? Is it something that's just common to maybe Boston and Austin and San Francisco? Or do you see this as a role that is growing in popularity and that people would benefit from learning more about it?
Yeah, totally. I think based on what I've seen, definitely major cities. And I'm originally from the East Coast. So, I mean, me moving to Austin, Texas, is where I'm at right now. I was just kind of pulled into a world where like, yeah, there's a lot of new technologies happening fast. And not only that, but like a lot of new titles that you just see. And like sometimes like it's like recruiter driven, right? So so maybe like, you're doing like traditional ops or something like that. And then all of a sudden you just start seeing like these roles pop up for SRE. I think there's definitely a massive demand for it. I'm not going to deny that. I feel as though, just looking at it from a numbers perspective, like ops and SRE is just there for now, right? Like, and that goes with everything. These things change. I've been in the industry for 5+ years now, but I've just seen a lot of change. But I feel like right now it's definitely in demand. But at the same time, I feel like there's just definitely like a disconnect between some organizations understanding what like truly like a DevOps role is. Like you're working on CI/CD and like you're working on a lot of implementation, as opposed to something like SRE with like more of that reliability aspect of like you're maintaining systems and you're like you're pretty much ready to be woken up. You're kind of signing on to that. You're battling fires in the middle of the night if you get woken up. So get those run books ready. But the takeaway here is like, yeah, I definitely see it as a larger role, as a required role. But yeah, we'll see where that goes.
So I mean, people still trying to get their head around this. Can you walk us through like a day in the life of what you do as an SRE, so maybe they get a flavor of what this really is all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So from my day today up until now, mind you, this is, and I want to provide the context here as well, just from like the day in life perspective. The context right now is I'm working on a greenfield project, and we're working on a new, just a new approach to how we're doing things. Like we have a site that's running right now. It's, it's making the company money. Great. That's awesome. But at the same time, like, we got some buy-in because we had to just this more enormous technical debt on our existing system. So we got the go ahead to develop this new platform essentially. And, we were choosing all the technologies. So whether that was AWS, Google, in our case, Google Cloud, right? So from the infrastructure perspective, from the SRE perspective, I chose Google Cloud because they were going to go with microservices, and they are going with microservices. And I just kind of like Googled around and, kind of understood and, dove into the community and understood like, yeah, okay, Kubernetes is the way to go. All of our applications are being containerized. I need to do it with K8s. And then like one of the options there for us was GKE. And like, it's for what I wanted, it just solved everything. So that's kind of the context, right? So because we're on a new project, I'm actually like I would have to say very much like doing a lot of ops work right now, in the sense that today I woke up, went into the office because I'm, like I said, and we're dealing with, absolute world crisis with the coronavirus. And I went to the office today to pick up a few books, headphones, etc., because we're all working from home at the moment. Very, lucky to be able to do that. And then reviewed my emails, hopped into Slack, kind of looked at what everyone else was working on today, kind of posted what I was up to, because that's kind of what we're doing remote wise. And then dove into some documentation. So yesterday I was working with something called ZB, and ZB is like this workflow modeler, and I'm installing it on our cluster. So we have a running cluster in Google Kubernetes engine. And I was using Helm for that. So Helm is just like, I think it was like a package manager just for Kubernetes. So you have all these applications set up in charts. And then I just did an installation of ZB into the clusters to get this one of the latest versions on there for everybody. Because we're, our infrastructure and our microservices are super reliant on that. So, and then from there I went in, updated Confluence. So that's some of our documentation. And then I'm going back and doing some research today on our continuous delivery approach. So I'm looking at, Keel.sh versus GCP, Google Cloud Platforms, all these acronyms. They're continuous delivery models. So they have some pipelines that they released, it was like maybe like a week or two ago, as an alternative to using, something like Spinnaker or something else. So that's what I'm up to today. Just some busy work, some documentation, and then just some research. And then just, I would have to say, like, over the past couple of months, because this is a new project and because, I'm like, this is a new role for me as well. So it's just been like a lot of research and a lot of like, a lot of doing things and just like learning from doing them wrong potentially, and then going back and changing it. And I do want to note, like, I'm, because we're such a small team, we're like a team of essentially a bunch of seniors, except for myself in this particular role. In like the test automation space, the testing space, I more of a senior in that role, but in this one, most certainly not. So and the interesting thing there is like I'm the only one working on this at the moment. So a lot of what I do is pretty crucial. But that's my day today. On average, I mean, it just depends entirely on the organization. Some people can be, writing Kubernetes operators and further automating, their deployment process. And other organizations, the title could be something different, and they could be working on, writing some Terraform, for example, and then applying that in however they apply it. Or just looking for things to automate, lessening that toil. Maybe they're working on some error budgets. Maybe they're actively just relying or tinkering with, their observability models. So that's my day in the life, and then like potentially some other SRE's day in the life. It seems like a post I should write as well, because it's a really good point, because a lot of people hear this title and they see like some of the requirements for it, but they don't necessarily know what like the day-to-day is. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, it could be, when you see a job posting for SRE, you're like, oh my gosh, this is a unicorn. No one could do all this. So, right. I mean, to me, when I see an SRE, I'm like, that's like every I don't know anyone that could do all that, but it sounds like maybe, I don't know, pick a few that you're really good at. And
I totally agree with you.
yeah, so,
And it's like one of those roles where like, a lot of people, and that seems to be like a lot of roles nowadays, like even like a full stack engineer. Like I know back in the day it was like one of those unicorn finds. It's like, oh my goodness, somebody can work on like front end, back end, like, and actually up to the Postgres database or something. But yeah, I agree with you. Like some days I'm working on like, I was doing some Postgres work, and like, I think like just one of the main things just in engineering in general, because like, ultimately at the end of the day, like everybody's an engineer, but realistically, like not everybody can do everything. Not everybody wants to do everything either. So I totally agree with that. But I do find, because, and I think my context is like a bit different than some others, because I do find myself like doing just a lot of different things, right? Like I said, like last week I was working on some Postgres stuff, and I think what it comes down to is just really having that knack of just like picking something up and like learning a little bit about it. Not like, and it kind of sucks for me sometimes, because I'm the type of person who I do want to dive into a book and just like really truly solidly understand something. But sometimes when you're working in this space and like maybe you have to find yourself like running through the documentation and just getting something done, within a reasonable amount of time, right? So that's kind of how I see it as well. Like, and it's interesting too, because like, I totally agree. Like sometimes I see like security requirements as well, but like not everybody can just have that, right? So you have to read into it further and just kind of apply what you know at that time. But yeah, it's just like mistake driven implementations, and then you just kind of like learn from that, or just go back, or like, maybe you have I'm fortunate to have like a really good community of, because I run the meetup, I run Austin Automation Professionals with some other fantastic organizers, and like I've been just fortunate enough to be able to learn a lot from larger organizations and how they apply things. I've used that as a model for myself to, just having friends in like all these amazing companies, like, and just trying to learn from them, not bothering them. I'm not like, I'm not like, hey, how do you do this, like all the time. And it's more so just like in conversation. I'm just like, I'm running into this. How do we do this? And like, the beauty about these meetups and these social organizations as well is just kind of like understanding how somebody's doing something. And I have a friend of mine, and it's interesting because like he was also an SDET, test automation, like I said, once again, whatever you want to call the title. And, he did make that transition over to SRE and ops, whatever you want to call it. And, I've been fortunate enough to learn a lot from him. So that's a really good thing, because my team here is small. His team was small as well. Like he had like 2 or 3 people, and he kind of took the lead over there, for what he was doing at the time. And he was able to tell me about Ansible and, how they're using it with Postgres, and, it was really nice, and just sent me articles and stuff. And, so I thought that was good. So if you do find yourself in a position where like, it's only you, and like, you're kind of like, going through the day to day, and it's on you to like kind of make these decisions, and you're kind of thrown into the mix, definitely get involved with the community, whether that's in real life or right now, because we're dealing with a crisis. It's on Slack or Twitter. Just find your people, find your good people to learn with, and then give back, please.
And it sounds like a fun position. I can't imagine having another position where all you do is write scripts that drive a browser. This seems like you get the best of both worlds. You're still able to code. You're still able to automate, but automate really sounds like interesting things, not just a browser. And so it seems like the best of both worlds to me, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a lot of fun, and I agree with you. It's like once you write that, like, and shout out to HashiCorp, just amazing things that they've done with like Terraform and, even Vagrant back in the day. Like a lot of people are still using Vagrant. Just a lot of cool stuff with Terraform. Just like the moment that you write some of that code, whatever, and like you just see your infrastructure spin up, like an EC2 instance or something as simple as like Compute Engine instance in GCP. It's like, it's amazing. It's really, really amazing. That was like, I just remember like the first time like I was on Sauce Lab, and I just like automated. I went through one of the tutorials and like automated a browser, and I just saw that browser instance pop up, and just like I was just amazed. I thought it was fantastic.
You mentioned observability a few times, and this is a term I've been hearing more of maybe the past year. I never had anyone tell me, though, what is observability? What is observability? Like I said, you have mentioned it a few times.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things. Like I've you have to find like this solid, like pinpointed definition. It's, I mean, Google definitely nailed an SRE. Like I just want to like definitely encourage everyone to go over and check out to see what Google's up to with the SRE space, and of course the SRE handbook and everything else. But getting back to observability, I feel as though it's like, I feel like it's just this aggregation of information, whether that's monitoring, it's APM, so it's application performance monitoring, whether that's RUM, real user monitoring. It's just like everything aggregated to the point where, you know, you have a full viewpoint, and it's not necessarily like somebody like staring at a browser all day and staring at graphs all day. It's you know, you have a lot of data there. You have this high cardinality where, you know, you can trust your system to tell you the right information, and not even tell you the right information, but I mean, really for us, especially in the SRE space or anyone like on call, to alert you on the right information. And then, you know, from there, it goes even further. It's like to not alert you all the time, because you're going to, you know, you'll end up hitting alert fatigue, but just to alert you at the right moments for the right data. And that all relates to, you know, your service level agreements and all of that. But I mean, that's my takeaway. I just feel as though it's like an aggregated amount of like monitoring and all of these things, just to the point where it's like streamlined, where people can actually like ingest it properly, and you're not bouncing between a bunch of different, you know, applications that tell you something. And that includes logging too. I feel as though almost that includes logging. But there's so many people that have like real better definitions than I do, I promise you. Because I mean, my contact once again is I used to use New Relic, and we still use New Relic for our legacy application. But I'm actively looking into, like, for GK, like it was kind of out of the box. I'm just using Stackdriver, and I'm trying to set things up so it's, you know, it's alerting us at the right moment. But I would highly advise checking out honeycomb.io and just everything that they have to say about observability, because I almost feel as though like it's one of those words that everyone else started consuming. Everybody else started taking the word and using it in all of their marketing material. Whether, you know, I'm not going to name any organizations, but yeah.
So as a site reliability engineer, we are living through coronavirus as we speak today, and a lot of people are now working from home. And so I assume that a lot of companies are experiencing things on their infrastructure that they may not have anticipated now that their whole workforce is coming in from the outside. Is that something a site reliability engineer would be involved in, or is that a totally different group when we talk about like infrastructure?
I definitely think, like, you know, maintaining, you know, the application reliability and all of that is a big deal, right? So, you know, I like from a remote perspective, you know, people that are working from home right now, I mean, there's like traditional infrastructure, you know, there's definitely like a lot of organizations, banking, and, you know, some of the more security space, like whether it's big gov or whatever it might be. Yeah, there's definitely people on staff. There's like, you know, network operations people and all of that kind of thing. A lot of it, I don't know if it feels like a lot of it can be done from home now. And like, especially during a crisis, right? Like you start to see like a lot of positions that, you know, you thought were only in office, you know, now they're like suddenly becoming like, you know, a work from home role. And it's kind of shocking to a lot of people to see that as an employee. It's like, you know, you're kind of surprised, like, oh, I could have just been doing this, and like, I'm more comfortable, you know, just working from home or whatever it might be. But yeah, getting to the point, it's like, yeah, from an SRE perspective, yeah, we can definitely do this, a lot of this from home, especially if you're in a public cloud. I know a lot of SRE roles are remote. You know, there's tons of those roles. You know, so much of this is remote. You know, you just have to make yourself available, you know, and communicate. I mean, me personally, like, you know, dealing with this crisis, Slack has been super helpful. So like, you know, with them since, and working on all sorts of different stuff. But yeah, I hear you. That's wild.
Okay, Evan, before we go, is there one piece of actionable advice you can give someone to help them with their SRE efforts? And what's the best way to find or contact you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, it absolutely goes beyond any of the resources that I posted, but a big deal is just don't stop learning, you know, but ultimately don't get stuck in tutorial hell. Don't feel as though you have to go through a million tutorials before you actually hop into something, before you actively get your hands in something. You know, that's just what I've learned, you know, the hard way, because that was me for a while. And then the main thing is like, you know, if you want to change roles, you don't have to leave everything behind. So that's a big deal. You can, you know, there's a lot that applies to everywhere else. And then just in the context of what's happening in the world, you know, definitely the Mr. Rogers quote, look for the helpers, but also be a helper yourself. I feel like a lot of people helping each other out through this. I see people on Twitter posting like Zoom links to chat rooms and stuff like that. It's super helpful for people who are remote right now and who aren't used to it, who need to socialize. So I think it's super cool. So do that, help each other out right now, because it's a pretty crazy time. You can reach out to me on Twitter. I tweet a little bit. I want to tweet more, and definitely my blog. I want to write more as well, and just help out as many people as possible. And I want to give a shout out to Lisa Crispin for helping me with this blog post on the DevTest Ops community. And and that's it.
Thank you, Evan, for your performance testing and site reliability awesomeness. For links to everything of value we covered in this episode, head on over to testguild.com/P28. And while you're there, make sure to click on the Try Today link under the exclusive sponsor section to learn all about SmartBear's awesome performance testing tool, Load Ninja. So that's it for this episode of the Test Guild Performance and Site Reliability Podcast. I'm Joe, and my mission is to help you succeed with creating end-to-end full-stack automation awesomeness. As always, test everything and keep the good. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Test Guild Performance and Site Reliability Podcast. Head on over to testguild.com for full show notes, amazing blog articles, and online testing conferences. Don't forget to subscribe to the Guild to continue your testing journey.